Stop being dramatic. We are being efficient, Tom wrote on an email. I stared at the screen. Then I opened a new document and added it to my file, because there it was again, in writing. The bleakest moment came on a night shift when everything fell apart at once. We had a new grad nurse assigned to a patient with a complicated medication regimen. Pharmacy was behind. The family was furious about wait times. A confused patient pulled out an IV. Another patient's oxygen saturation dropped. The call lights didn't stop. The monitor alarms felt like sirens in my skull. At 2:17 a.m., Marisol called me. Marisol, Amelia, I need you now. Me, I'm coming. I ran, literally ran, into a room where a patient was pale and sweating, clutching their chest. We initiated protocol, got an EKG, called the provider. The provider didn't answer for 10 minutes. 10 minutes, because providers were covering too many units too, because the whole system was stretched thin like a rubber band about to snap. When the provider finally called back, I could hear irritation in his voice. Provider, why are you calling me at 2 a.m? Because my patient has new chest pain, EKG changes, and I need orders now. Provider, just give nitro and see. Me, I need the full protocol this could be. Provider, you're being dramatic. I almost laughed. The phrase was everywhere, like a virus. Me, I'm being precise. I'm initiating emergency protocol. I need orders. We got the orders. We transferred the patient. Again, a near miss instead of a death. At 4 a.m., while we were trying to catch up, Todd emailed me, yes, in the middle of the night, because he apparently didn't sleep, asking why documentation was behind, and reminding me that compliance is non-negotiable. I sat at the computer, hands trembling, and thought, if I keep fighting this internally, he will bury me. He will keep tightening the noose until something breaks, either my license or a patient. So the next day, I escalated. Not emotionally, precisely. I filed a formal complaint through the hospital's compliance hotline. I included dates, staffing ratios, overtime freeze, repeated refusal to address safety concerns, pressure to align documentation, and the suspicious schedule discrepancy. I didn't use names where I didn't have to. I used facts. Then I waited. And while I waited, Todd turned the screws. He scheduled another meeting, this time with a letterhead feel. Not just HR, not just compliance support. Now there was someone from legal on the call, and the word board was dropped, casually, like a knife placed on the table. Legal rep, if we find evidence of intentional falsification, we are obligated to report to the nursing board. My mouth went dry. Me, there is no evidence of intentional falsification because it did not happen. Todd, Amelia, stop making this harder. Me, stop making it a lie. We've collected statements. Me, from who? Dana, multiple staff. Me, names, we can't disclose. Me, then I can't defend myself. This is procedural unfairness. Todd, you're not on trial. Me, you're threatening my license. That's a trial. That meeting ended with them putting me on administrative leave. Paid, technically. But in nursing, paid leave pending investigation is not a vacation. It is a scarlet letter. It is every coworker whispering, what did she do? It is the sick dread of knowing your career might be over because you refused to do something unethical. I went home and stared at my kitchen table like it was unfamiliar. I'd spent so many years being the reliable one, the competent one, the one who could handle chaos with steady hands. Now, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. My phone buzzed. It was a text from a number I didn't recognize. Unknown, you should have just played ball. Then another. Unknown, enjoy unemployment, Amelia. Flying monkeys, anonymous cowards, people who wanted to feel powerful by kicking someone already down. I blocked the numbers. Another number texted. Unknown, we all know what you did. I took screenshots, saved them, added them to the file. 2 days later, I got an email. Termination of employment. Reason, documentation falsification leading to patient harm. Patient harm. Those words are poison. They stick. The letter included a paragraph about the hospital reserving the right to report me to the board. I sat on my couch, the letter in my hands, and for the first time in my adult life, I felt truly powerless. Not sad, not angry, hollow, like someone had scooped out my insides and left me standing. I called Marisol. She answered immediately. Marisol, Amelia, they fired me. Silence, then a sharp inhale like she'd been punched. Marisol, no, they can't. Me, they did. Marisol, what are you going to do? I looked at the letter again, at the sterile language, at the implication that I was dangerous. Me, I'm going to be precise. That day, I called an attorney. This is where things shift, and I know people will ask why I didn't do it sooner. The truth is, most nurses don't have the money to hire a lawyer the moment a supervisor starts being shady. Most nurses try to handle things internally because we're trained to fix problems, to de-escalate, to keep the peace. And because we don't want to believe the system is capable of intentionally destroying us. My attorney's name was Diane. She had a voice like calm steel. Diane, tell me exactly what happened. So I did. I didn't embellish. I didn't cry. I laid out the timeline like a chart. Dates, staffing ratios, emails, schedule discrepancy, repeated pressure to align documentation. Diane listened. Then she said something that made my throat tighten. Diane, Amelia, do you have copies of those emails? Me, yes. Good. Do you have your notes from meetings? Me, yes. Dated. Good. Do you have any proof of the schedule alteration? Me, I have screenshots of the posted schedule and a later printed schedule that differs, and I can request badge access logs. Diane, excellent. Then, after a pause, in a tone that sounded almost amused, Diane, they were sloppy. Me, sloppy? Diane, sloppy criminals. We're going to respond and we're going to be very, very precise. That gave me enough relief to breathe for the first time in days. Then the second betrayal hit. The hospital didn't just fire me. They sued me. I got served at my home like I was some kind of thief, like I was the danger. The lawsuit claimed I had willfully falsified documentation, caused financial harm, and damaged the hospital's reputation. They wanted to scare me. They wanted to make me fold. I called Diane, voice shaking. Me, they're suing me, and Diane did something I didn't expect. She laughed, not in a cruel way, in a you have got to be kidding way. Me, why are you laughing? Diane, because they just handed us discovery. Me, I don't understand. If they want to make this a legal matter, they have to produce documents, internal emails, staffing contracts, billing directives, schedules. They have to open their own drawers. My stomach flipped. Me, they'll hide everything. Diane, they can try, but then they lie under oath, and judges don't like that. For the first time, Todd's power felt not absolute. Over the next few weeks, the trickle of information became a flood. Diane filed responses. She demanded specifics. The hospital's legal team sent over documents, some redacted, some incomplete, but enough to see the pattern. And then, the turning point. Diane received a batch of internal emails that made my blood run cold. There were emails from Todd to department heads, with phrases that matched everything I'd been hearing. Todd email. Ensure coding reflects highest acuity appropriate. Todd email. Fix charts after the fact to support billing. Todd email. If documentation is late, adjust to reflect completion within policy. Todd email. We cannot afford denials. Align narratives. Align narratives. And there, buried in a thread, was an instruction that made my hands start to shake again. Not from fear, but from rage. Todd email. If staff resist, remind them employment is at will. He wasn't just pressuring people, he was threatening them. Diane set up a meeting with me in her office. She spread the documents out on a table like evidence in a crime show. Diane, this is bigger than your termination. Me, it's billing fraud. Diane, it's likely billing fraud. Me, and they framed me. Diane, they needed a scapegoat. I stared at the emails, at the casual way Todd wrote about fixing charts as if it were tidying a room. As if patients weren't human beings whose stories were being rewritten to increase revenue. Me, how do we prove it? Diane, we keep being precise. Then came the big twist, and it didn't come from some dramatic confession. It came from a contract. The hospital had been using a staffing agency to fill holes. That wasn't unusual. What was unusual was how much money was being paid to that agency, and how often the agency couldn't provide coverage, and how the hospital then used that lack of coverage as justification to cut baseline staffing. It was like they were setting the unit up to fail, and then pointing at the failure as proof the staff were incompetent. Diane's paralegal found the agency ownership records. The agency was owned by a relative of Todd Mercer. Not a distant cousin, not a maybe, a close relative. Diane, they were siphoning funds. It's classic. Create shortages, blame staff, pay your own company to fix the shortage, then say the shortage can't be fixed, so you cut staffing further. Me. So the suffering was intentional. Diane's expression didn't soften. Diane, yes, I sat there stunned, thinking of the exhausted nurses, the missed breaks, the tears in supply closets, the families pleading for updates while we tried to keep people alive with too few hands. All of it exploited, all of it monetized. Me. How many patients were put at risk because of this? Diane. Too many. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing faces. Mr. D, clammy and confused, the chest pain patient, the post-op bleed, the people who trusted us. And I kept hearing Todd's voice. Stop being dramatic. I wasn't being dramatic. I was being precise. And the precise truth was that a man with expensive shoes had built a machine that turned human suffering into revenue. And when I refused to be a cog, he tried to crush me. The final pieces fell into place almost by accident. A former coworker, someone who'd kept her head down during the investigation, reached out to me from a personal email. Her name was Lila. She was quiet, competent, and had always avoided politics. Her message was short. Lila email, I can't live with this. He told me to change a chart. I said no. He said to do it or someone else will. I have screenshots. Can I talk to your lawyer? I forwarded it to Diane immediately. Diane called me. Diane, this is your whistleblower support. This is someone inside willing to corroborate. Me, will it ruin her? Diane, it might hurt her, but it will also protect patients, and we will protect her as much as we can. Lila met with Diane. She brought screenshots of messages from Heather, the flying monkey, telling her which charts to fix and which codes to select. Heather message, use the higher complexity code. Todd wants denials down. Heather message, just adjust the time so it's within policy. Adjust the time. Backdate. Falsify. And then, because the universe sometimes aligns when you've been precise long enough, the state announced a routine inspection. Not because of me specifically, those things happen, but because hospitals always get inspected. And Todd, in his arrogance, assumed he could control it like he controlled schedules. He couldn't. The inspectors requested staffing records, incident reports, documentation audit trails, billing codes. They asked questions that couldn't be answered with smiles. Todd tried to charm them, tried to solutions focus them, tried to call concerns dramatic. But inspectors are paid to be precise. And so, in the span of a week, everything Todd had tried to bury surfaced. Schedule edits, documentation audit trails showing changes after the fact, billing patterns that spiked in suspicious ways, payments to a staffing agency with a family connection, incident reports that disappeared from internal logs but existed in staff personal records, my notes, Lila's screenshots, Marisol's shift logs, the badge access logs proving I was present on the dates Todd claimed I was absent. It was like watching a dam crack. The hospital tried to spin it at first. They always do. They tried to say it was isolated. They tried to say it was miscommunication. They tried to say they were committed to improvement. Todd tried too. He called me. The audacity. Todd, Amelia, we need to talk. Talk about what? Todd, this has gotten out of hand. Me, you sued me. Todd, that was procedural. Me, you tried to destroy my career. Todd, stop being dramatic. I laughed then. A short, sharp sound. Me, I'm being precise. You falsified schedules to frame me. Todd, Amelia, listen. If you cooperate, we can resolve this. Quietly. Me, quietly for who? Todd, for everyone. Everyone meaning you. Todd's voice got tight. You don't understand how these things work. Me, I understand exactly how they work. That's why you're scared. Todd, I'm not scared. Me, then why are you calling me? Silence. Then softer, like he was trying on remorse. Todd, we all make mistakes. Me, not this mistake, this was a choice. Todd, I can fix it. Me, you can't, because I kept notes. He hung up. After the inspection, the hospital abruptly reversed my termination. They offered reinstatement, back pay, a mutual agreement to move forward. It was too late for that. They didn't get to ruin me and then hand me my job back like a returned sweater. Diane negotiated from a position of strength. I won't get into legal specifics, but the outcome mattered. My record was cleared. The allegations were withdrawn. The threat to report me to the board vanished. The hospital issued a written statement acknowledging no evidence of wrongdoing on my part. Todd was removed from his position, pending investigation. Heather disappeared first. Suddenly she was on leave. Then she was pursuing other opportunities. Flying monkeys always vanish when the tree stops bearing fruit. Todd tried to salvage himself. He sent emails about accountability and learning. He tried to frame himself as someone who had been misled by data. He tried to pin it on process failures. that the paper trail was too precise. The staffing agency contract alone was a noose. The audit trails were nails. The inspector's report was a hammer. In the end, Todd didn't get a redemption arc. He didn't get a heartfelt apology montage. He didn't get to stand in front of staff and say, "I'm sorry." He was escorted out, quietly. No clicking shoes, no speeches. Just a man who thought he was untouchable, carrying a box while everyone looked away. Not because they pitied him, but because they couldn't stand to see the emptiness where his authority used to be. I didn't go back to my old unit, not as manager. The hospital offered me a new role, patient safety lead, partly because it looked good, partly because they needed someone credible, and partly because they knew I would never let this happen again without a fight. I accepted, but not because I trusted them. I accepted because I trusted the nurses and patients who still had to survive inside that building. I accepted because someone had to be precise on purpose. The first day in my new role, I stood in the hallway outside the unit where I'd been humiliated, where I'd been fired, where I'd watched good nurses cry in supply closets, and I felt something settle in my chest. Not peace, not yet, but resolve. Marisol hugged me so hard I almost lost my breath. Marisol, you did it. We did it. Because that's the truth no administrator understands. Patient safety isn't one person. It's a culture. It's the good people refusing to become quiet. And if you're wondering about the patients, the ones used as props in Todd's scheme, some of them found out. Not all details, but enough. Families asked questions. Some filed complaints. The state required changes. Staffing improved. Not perfect, but better. The unit stopped hemorrhaging experienced nurses. A few people came back. Sometimes late at night, I still remember the letter that said, "Patient harm." I still feel that hollow moment. But then I remember what happened after. The records, the audit, the truth, the victory that wasn't a triumphant speech, but a quiet shift back towards safety. So Reddit, AITA for refusing to align documentation, for making it a compliance issue, for lawyering up, and for pushing until the whole fraud scheme cracked open, even though it caused chaos and fear and made people's lives uncomfortable. Because part of me still hears that voice, "Stop being dramatic." And part of me answers every time, "I'm being precise." Edit 1. A lot of you are asking why I didn't leave sooner. It's complicated. Nurses don't just walk away when things get unsafe, because the unsafe thing is happening to patients in real time. Also, when you're a manager, you're responsible for your staff. I stayed longer than I should have because I believed I could shield them by documenting and escalating. I didn't realize the person I was escalating to was the one creating the danger. Edit 2. People keep asking how my coworkers turned on me. Fear, mostly. When someone threatens the nursing board, people panic. They worry they'll be dragged down too. And then there are always a few who like being close to power. Heather wasn't the only one messaging me anonymously, but she was the loudest in person. Once the investigation started unraveling, those same people vanished. Not a single apology. Not one. Edit 3. Yes, I reported the anonymous harassment texts. No, nothing meaningful came of that part. But I kept screenshots because patterns matter. Also, for everyone saying, "This is why you record conversations," check your local laws first. I didn't record. I wrote contemporaneous notes immediately after meetings and saved emails and schedules. Precision beats panic. If you've ever watched someone in power try to rewrite reality at work, or if you've ever been punished for doing the right thing, come join my YouTube community. Like and subscribe, because stories like this are why we don't stay quiet when injustice shows up in a uniform and a smile. I didn't expect to become the kind of person who keeps receipts like it's a second job. But once Todd pulled the schedule stunt, I stopped assuming anyone would protect me but me. And before anyone jumps in with, "But Amelia, why didn't you just quit?" I need you to understand something about nursing and guilt. When you quit, you don't just leave a building, you leave patients. You leave coworkers you've cried with in supply closets. You leave new grads who don't know how to say no yet. You leave families who don't know the system is quietly being starved behind the scenes. I told myself I was staying to fight. I told myself I was staying because I was responsible. And maybe I was, but I also think I stayed because I couldn't accept that doing the right thing could actually lose. So when they fired me and sent that termination letter like I was a danger, something in me snapped into a different kind of calm. Not peaceful calm. The calm you get when your body realizes panic won't help. So it turns into a machine with a notebook. The hospital called it Separation. HR language always tries to turn violence into paperwork. I spent the first 48 hours doing 3 things: eating almost nothing, staring at walls, compiling a timeline like I was building a case for a murder trial. Because to me, it was a murder trial. Not of a person, but of my reputation, my license, and the idea that patient safety mattered. I made a master document titled Amelia, Chronology, Documentation Pressure, plus Staffing Cuts. Then I built it like a chart. Date, time, event, who was present, exact language used as close as possible, quoted, supporting evidence, email, screenshot, note, incident report reference, patient impact, if any, action taken, incident report, staffing escalation, etc. It wasn't dramatic. It was clinical. It was how I'd write a note when the patient is crashing and you need the next shift to understand what happened without emotion muddying it. My attorney, Diane, told me that was the right instinct. Courts like people who document like nurses, she said. You're going to win because you treat truth like a vital sign. Todd assumed he controlled the story inside the hospital. He did not account for what happens when you try to frame someone in a building full of people trained to notice inconsistencies. Because nurses are not stupid. We may be tired, but we are not stupid. At first, most people stayed away from me. Fear does that. But the ones who had been on the worst shifts started sending quiet little messages. Not dramatic. Not, OMG, I can't believe this. More like, hey, did HR ask you about March 4th? I remember you being there that night. I have a photo of the assignment board with your name on it. Do you need me to write a statement? That's how it begins. One person willing to say, this doesn't add up. Then 2, then 4, then the dam starts to creak. Marisol was my anchor. She didn't waffle. She didn't do the both sides nonsense. She called me the day I got fired and said, I'm not letting them rewrite what I saw. She had something Todd didn't realize existed, a shift log. Some charge nurses keep a quick handwritten log for their own sanity, patient moves, bed assignments, major events, which nurse took which admission, because when you're juggling chaos, you need an external brain. Marisol had her log from March 4th. My name was in it. Not Amelia, maybe. Not manager. My name. With times. Amelia in 212 at 0110. Held pressure. Called surgeon. I cried when she read it to me. Not because I was surprised. Because the truth existed outside the machine Todd controlled. Here's what Todd did. And I'm saying it plainly because I want anyone reading this who's in healthcare admin to understand how disgusting it is. They used absence as a weapon. If you can make it look like I wasn't present during a crisis, then my incident reports look like fabrication, my advocacy looks like exaggeration, my leadership looks like negligence, my ethics looks like defensiveness, and suddenly it's easy to say, she's a problem. They edited a schedule to show I was off. They implied my presence was unclear. Then they built the narrative. Amelia isn't around. Amelia doesn't support staff. Amelia only shows up to write incident reports. That last part was the most insulting, as if writing incident reports is a hobby. Incident reports are how you document that something unsafe happened, so it doesn't happen again. Todd treated them like a threat, because to him, they were. I need to clarify what they accused me of, because people keep picturing cartoonish chart tampering like I was in the system rewriting entire histories. No. Their claim was more subtle, that I encouraged staff to chart late, that I approved edits after the fact, that I pressured staff to ensure compliance, and that these practices resulted in patient harm. If that sounds vague, it's because it was designed to be vague. Vague accusations are harder to disprove. Specific lies can be punctured. Vague ones can float forever. But the implication was clear. I falsified records, and in nursing, that's career death. So when Diane said they gave us discovery, I didn't fully understand what that meant until the hospital started producing documents. And then I saw it. There was an internal email chain titled something like Denials, Action Plan, Unit Documentation. And it was full of polished corporate phrases that translate to, we're losing money, make the charts match what we need. One message written by Todd included a line that I will never forget because it was so casual and so evil. If it wasn't charted timely, correct it so the timestamp supports policy. Not educate staff. Not improve workflow. Correct it, make the timestamp support policy. That is not a misunderstanding. That is instruction. Another email said, narrative must support billing level. Ensure highest appropriate code. I know people outside healthcare might not feel the weight of that, But when someone non-clinical tells clinical staff to make documentation support billing, it's like telling a pilot to adjust the black box. And then, buried in the thread was the line that linked it to my refusal. Amelia continues to escalate staffing concerns and incident reports. This must be addressed. I stared at that sentence for a long time, because there it was, proof that this wasn't about patient safety, it was about shutting me up. When Diane said sloppy criminals, I thought she was exaggerating. Then she showed me the staffing contracts. The hospital was paying obscene rates to a staffing agency for nurses they often didn't receive. And every time the agency couldn't fill a shift, Todd would use it as justification. See, we can't staff. It's a national shortage. We have to be realistic. We need to right-size staffing models. But the agency they were paying was linked to Todd's family. I'm going to keep some specifics vague, but the relationship was close enough that it made my skin crawl. It explained something that had never made sense to me. Why would an administrator be so eager to cut baseline staffing, knowing it would create chaos? Because chaos was profitable if you controlled the solution. If you can create a shortage, you can justify emergency premium staffing contracts, inflated crisis, payments, overtime restrictions, forcing dependence on agency labor, and blaming clinical leadership for the fallout. And if the agency is connected to you, it's a siphon, a quiet leak, death by 1,000 invoices. Up until then, I was angry for myself, for my license, for my career. Then I saw the pattern. Every understaffed shift wasn't just hard, it was strategic. Every near miss was a casualty of a system designed to run at the edge of collapse. And every time I wrote an incident report, I wasn't being difficult, I was documenting the edge. So when people ask why I pushed, why I didn't just settle quietly, why I had to blow it up, because it wasn't just my job. It was a machine that chewed up patience. Remember how I said I filed a formal compliance complaint before they fired me? Yeah. Diane requested a copy. The hospital said they had no record of it. I almost laughed. Like, actually laughed. Because I had a screenshot of the submission confirmation page with a timestamp and case number. When Diane sent that back and asked again, suddenly, magically, there was a record. But it was incomplete and missing attachments. Missing attachments. Of course. That's when Diane's tone changed from calm steel to something sharper. We're going to assume spoliation, she said. I asked what that meant. It means they destroyed or altered evidence, she replied. And judges don't love that. Here's something I didn't know until later. When enough complaints and incident patterns stack up, staffing, denials, late charting pressures, turnover, state agencies sometimes notice. Not always quickly, not always dramatically, but data talks. And the hospital had created enough smoke that even their own polished dashboards couldn't hide it forever. So when the state announced a routine survey window, Todd panicked behind the scenes while pretending everything was fine. He called department heads, he scheduled readiness meetings, he sent emails about professionalism. And, this part made me furious, he tried to preemptively blame nurses. There was a message that basically said, ensure staff understand the importance of accurate charting. We will not tolerate deviation. Not, we will support you. Not, we will fix staffing. We will not tolerate deviation. The message wasn't about quality. It was about control. Lila was the quiet nurse who emailed me saying she couldn't live with it. She was scared. She had bills. She had a mortgage. She had a kid. And she'd watched what happened to me. That's why she didn't come forward earlier. People think whistleblowers are bold and fearless. Most are just exhausted people who reach a breaking point. Lila told Diane something that still makes my chest tight. I watched what they did to Amelia, and I told myself I'd keep my head down. But then Todd told me to change the chart, and I realized they were going to do it to someone else next. That's how the machine stays alive, by isolating the person it targets, so everyone else learns to stay quiet. Lila's screenshots were simple, damning, and exactly what you want in an investigation. Heather's messages, direct. Adjust the time, needs to be within policy. Use the higher complexity level. Todd is watching denials. Don't make this harder. No ambiguity, no nuance, no maybe. Just do the unethical thing, or you're a problem. I wasn't in the building during the state survey, obviously, but I got updates from Marisol, from Lila, from one of the unit clerks who had always liked me and didn't hide it. And the updates were surreal. Todd wasn't screaming. Todd wasn't melting down. Todd was performing. He walked the halls with inspectors like he was guiding a museum tour. He smiled. He nodded. He used words like culture and excellence. Then, The inspectors asked for staffing records. Todd redirected. We have a robust staffing plan. Inspectors, we'd like to see the plan and the actual staffing schedules for the last 90 days. Todd, of course. Then they asked for documentation audit trails. Todd, our EHR checks everything. Inspectors, great. We'd like the logs for these patient charts and these users. And then, this is the part that makes me almost giddy in a dark way. They asked for the audit logs showing edits, because EHRs do track everything. That's the thing about fixing charts after the fact, inside a system built for legal defense. You can't hide every fingerprint. Todd didn't expect that level of precision. He expected a surface audit. He expected to charm. He expected nurses to be too scared to say anything. But inspectors are like sharks. Once they smell blood, they keep circling. Apparently there was a meeting in a glass-walled conference room. Of course it was glass-walled. Hospitals love humiliation as transparency, where Todd was confronted by a compliance officer and someone from finance. Staff could see Todd gesturing sharply, face tight, smile gone. Marisol said, I've never seen him look small. I'm not proud of the satisfaction I felt when I heard that. But after what he did to me, yeah, I felt it. Before the survey, I was a liar, a danger, a documentation criminal. After the survey started digging, I was a valued employee, and we want to resolve this. Isn't that fascinating? I received an email from HR that made me laugh out loud. Amelia, we would like to schedule a meeting to discuss next steps and opportunities for collaboration. Collaboration. I showed it to Diane. Diane, they're trying to contain the damage. Me, by offering me my job back? Diane, by trying to make you sign something. She was right. HR wanted a mutual separation agreement that included confidentiality, a gag order, a neat little bow. Diane responded with the professional equivalent of setting the agreement on fire. No confidentiality, full record clearing, written statement, damages, attorney fees, and, this part is important, patient safety commitments. Because I didn't want just money. I wanted staffing protected. I wanted charting pressure addressed. I wanted policy changes. I wanted the machine to lose teeth. I told you he called me. That wasn't the only time. He also emailed me directly from his work account. Todd, Amelia, I'm disappointed. This could have been handled internally. I stared at it and felt a strange calm again. Handled internally. Like he hadn't manipulated HR. Like he hadn't threatened the board. Like he hadn't edited schedules. Like he hadn't fired me publicly. I didn't reply. Diane did. Her reply was short and lethal in its politeness. Mr. Mercer, further direct contact with my client should cease. Any communication will be through counsel. Todd didn't email again. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a courtroom scene with a judge banging a gavel. It was an email from Diane with an attachment. Amelia, she wrote, this is the statement they're issuing. I opened it with my hands shaking. It said plainly that the hospital had investigated and found no evidence of intentional falsification by me, that allegations of wrongdoing were unsubstantiated, and that my termination was rescinded. Rescinded. That's a weird word when you've been publicly branded, like they think they can erase the mark by pressing Ctrl-Z. But it mattered, because the threat of the board disappeared, because my license was safe, because the lie was officially dead. I sat at my kitchen table and cried so hard my face hurt. Not because I won, because I survived. Because for weeks, I'd lived with the fear that my entire identity, nurse, protector, advocate, could be rewritten by someone with power and a smile. And it hadn't been. I can't share every detail, but here's what I can say. Todd was removed from his role during the investigation. Heather resigned suddenly. The staffing agency contract was terminated. The hospital implemented policy changes around documentation edits and audit review. Multiple managers were retrained, which is corporate language for, we're scared now. And yes, there were legal consequences for Todd beyond job loss, but the specifics depend on how things resolve in your jurisdiction and what the state decides to pursue. The important part is, he didn't walk away untouched, and he didn't get to keep using nurses as shields. People keep asking if I stayed. I did, but not because I trusted the hospital. I stayed because I trusted the staff who were still there. I took the patient safety lead role because it gave me access to data and audit processes Todd had weaponized. It gave me authority to demand staffing review tied to incident patterns. It put me in the path of future alignment attempts. And because I wanted every nurse who watched me get dragged to know, if they come for you next, I'm not letting you stand alone. This is where I genuinely want Reddit's judgment, because this is the part that still haunts me. When the investigation cracked open, the unit went through hell. People were interviewed, people were scared. Some nurses got pulled into it because they'd followed Heather's instructions and adjusted charts. Not maliciously, not greedily, because they were terrified of losing their jobs. The hospital tried to make those nurses the scapegoats once Todd started falling. And I fought that too. I insisted, through Diane and through the investigation, that the pressure came from the top. But still, some staff suffered stress they didn't deserve. And part of me wonders, if I had just quit quietly, would it have spared them that? Then I remember the patients, and I remember the machine would have kept chewing. So I'm torn between guilt and conviction. AITA for pushing until everything exploded, knowing it would drag terrified staff into the light, because I believed it was the only way to protect patients and stop the fraud. Update, because I know Reddit loves an update. Marisol is still on the unit and is now formally recognized as a safety champion. Yes, it's a cheesy title. No, she doesn't care. Lila transferred to a different unit but kept her job and her license. And the overtime freeze that Todd used as a weapon, gone. Also, the hospital is suddenly very interested in anonymous reporting and non-retaliation culture. Funny how that works when the paper trail points back at them. Part 3, continuing. The hardest part to explain to people outside healthcare is this. When someone weaponizes compliance, they can make almost anyone look guilty. Compliance is supposed to protect patients, but in the wrong hands, it becomes a blade. You don't even have to lie loudly. You just have to pick the right policy, the right phrasing, the right concern, and suddenly the person who's trying to keep people safe is the one under suspicion. And Todd knew the rules well enough to bend them without snapping them in public. After the hospital's reversal email hit Diane's inbox, I thought the board threat was dead. It wasn't. Diane called me late on a Thursday. Diane, they're floating something. Me, floating what? They're hinting they might report you anyway, out of an abundance of caution. My stomach dropped so hard I actually got dizzy. I sat down on the floor next to my couch like my legs weren't trustworthy. Me, but they said no evidence. Diane, HR doesn't always talk to legal, and legal doesn't always talk to compliance. Or they pretend they don't. This is leverage. Me, so they're still trying to scare me. Diane, yes. I didn't sleep that night. I laid in bed staring at the ceiling, doing mental math of worst-case scenarios. Not prison, not money, a board investigation. People think a board investigation is like, oops, paperwork. It's not. It's your whole career held up to a microscope while you try to prove you're not reckless. It's months, sometimes years of uncertainty. It's your name in a database that employers can see. It's the kind of thing that makes good nurses leave the profession because they can't take the stress. Todd wasn't threatening the board because he believed I did something wrong. He was threatening the board because he knew I cared. He wanted me to be so terrified I'd sign whatever confidentiality gag order they slid across the table. So, I did the only thing I could do. I got even more precise. I compiled a board packet. Not because I wanted to go to the board, but because I refused to be caught unprepared again. It included my employment evaluations, years of good performance, my certifications, staffing escalations I'd sent before any accusations, incident reports I'd filed with timestamps, emails where Todd told me to clean charts, screenshots showing schedule discrepancies, written statements from Marisol and 2 other staff who remembered key dates, my attorney's formal timeline. I was building a lifeboat while the ship still rocked. Diane sent a letter to the hospital's legal team that said, in essence, report her if you want. We're ready. And if you report without basis, we will pursue retaliation claims and damages. That's when the board threat evaporated. Not because they suddenly became ethical, because for the first time, the fear wasn't one-sided. The hospital's new plan sacrificed the nurses who followed orders. This part is where my rage got sharp enough to cut. When Todd started to fall, the hospital tried to pivot their blame onto the bedside staff. The narrative shifted overnight. Before, Amelia is the problem. After, a few nurses made inappropriate documentation decisions. A few nurses, as if bedside nurses wake up excited to adjust timestamps. As if anyone working 12 hours without water is thinking, you know what would be fun? Fraud. I got word, through Leela and Marisol, that staff were being pulled into meetings and asked questions that sounded less like fact-finding and more like confession harvesting. Questions like, when did you last edit a chart after the shift ended? Who told you to do that? Did you know it was against policy? That last one is a trap, because if you answer yes, you're guilty. If you answer no, you look incompetent. And if you say, I did it because I was told to, they can frame it as, so you admit you did it. I told Diane I wanted to intervene. Me, they're going to throw my nurses under the bus. Diane, I know. Me, they were pressured. Diane, I know. Me, some of them are new grads. Diane Amelia, her voice softened, not with pity but with warning. Diane, you have to understand your limits. You can advocate, but you can't sacrifice yourself again. Me, I'm not sacrificing myself. I'm refusing to let them do the same thing to someone else. So Diane did something I will always respect her for. She wrote a formal statement to the hospital that included a clear point. If the hospital disciplined bedside staff for documentation edits while evidence showed systemic pressure from management, it would be further retaliation, and it would strengthen our case. Translation, try it and we'll bury you. And because hospitals love self-preservation more than justice, the pressure on bedside staff eased, not vanished, not magically fixed, but the obvious scapegoating paused. I hadn't planned to go back until everything was settled. But once the hospital offered the patient safety lead role, they wanted an in-person meeting. I remember sitting in my car in the parking lot, hands on the steering wheel, staring at the entrance like it was a battlefield. Hospitals smell a certain way. Bleach, coffee, plastic, something metallic underneath. Walking in after being publicly branded felt like walking into a room where everyone had seen you naked. I kept telling myself, precision, not drama. The meeting was in a nicer conference room than the hard candy one. This one had a wall of windows and a pitcher of water and a tray of pastries that looked untouched. Dana from HR was there. A new compliance officer was there. Someone from patient safety was there. Todd was not there. Dana smiled too brightly. Dana, Amelia, we want to reiterate how much we value your commitment to quality. I almost choked. Me, you fired me. Dana, that decision was based on information we now understand was incomplete. Incomplete, like my life was a file folder. Me, so what happens now? Compliance officer, new guy, Andrew, we're implementing stronger safeguards. We want you involved. Me, why? Andrew hesitated, then said the quiet part out loud. Andrew, because you documented things other people didn't want documented. I stared at him. My heart pounded. Me, because I refused to falsify. He nodded once. A small, honest movement.
Dana, this role would allow you to... Before we discuss any role, I want a written statement clearing my record, and I want it communicated internally, not just in a file, not just in legal language. People need to know I didn't do what you said I did. Dana's smile froze. Dana, we can discuss. Me, no, that's not negotiable. Andrew watched me like he'd never seen someone say not negotiable in that room. Dana, we have to be careful about... Me, about liability? You already created liability. You told staff I harmed patients. Silence. Then Andrew said, quietly, Andrew, she's right. Dana looked at him like he'd betrayed her, which he had, in a way, but not the wrong way. That's the thing about truth. It makes cowards uncomfortable. A week later, after Diane and the hospital finalized the language, I got a copy of the internal communication they sent. It wasn't an apology. Hospitals don't apologize unless forced. But it said, clearly, that the investigation found no evidence of intentional wrongdoing by me and that prior allegations were unsubstantiated. It was sent to managers, not all staff. That part still stings, but it was enough that the gossip started to shift. And that's when I started receiving messages from people who had avoided me. Not apologies, just awkward attempts to reattach themselves to reality. Heather's former friends would message things like, hey girl, hope you're doing okay. That whole thing was crazy. Crazy, like the weather, like it happened to me. I left most of those on read, but one message knocked the air out of me. It was from Kayla, the new grad who'd alerted me about Mr. D that night. Kayla, I'm sorry I didn't defend you. I was scared. They told us not to talk. I knew you didn't do it. I stared at it until my eyes burned. Then I typed back, me, thank you for telling me. Please don't blame yourself. You kept patients safe when it mattered. That's what counts. And I meant it, because this is what Todd did to all of us.
He turned fear into silence, and silence is how unsafe systems survive. This part, I didn't witness firsthand, but enough people described it that I can see it like a movie in my head. During the compliance review, whether it was state-driven, internal, or both, they pulled audit logs. Audit logs show who accessed a chart, what they changed, when they changed it, sometimes even the original content. It's not perfect, but it's a fingerprint record. And apparently, when Todd was confronted with the pattern, multiple staff being directed to fix charts after the fact, edits clustering around billing cycles, corrections happening after denials, he did what people like Todd always do. He tried to make it about process. Todd, we were optimizing workflows. Compliance, the audit trail shows edits made to align with billing. Todd, that's interpretation. Compliance, it's timestamps. Todd, stop being dramatic. And that's when someone, one of the compliance people, maybe Andrew, said something that made multiple staff choke back laughter. Andrew, we're being precise. Todd apparently went very still, because you can't outpolitic timestamps. You can't charm audit logs. You can't gaslight a database that quietly remembers what you did. Here's what didn't make it into the neat ending. Even when Todd was removed, even when the staffing agency connection came to light, even when documentation pressures were acknowledged, the unit didn't magically heal. People were traumatized. Some nurses left anyway because the trust was gone. Some nurses stayed but became numb, clock in, clock out, no extra energy for a system that would happily sacrifice them. There were divisions, the ones who defended me quietly and felt vindicated, the ones who believed the rumors and felt embarrassed, the ones who followed Heather's instructions and felt terrified they'd be blamed, the ones who worshipped Todd and suddenly needed a new source of power. That kind of fracture doesn't seal overnight. And me? I was cleared on paper, but I still had moments where I'd catch someone's glance and wonder if they still believed the lie. Because once a rumor enters a workplace, it never fully dies. It just changes volume. I didn't take the role to be a hero. I took it to build guardrails. My first moves were boring but effective, required documentation education focused on ethical charting, not just timeliness, increased review of audit logs for suspicious edit patterns, tied staffing variance reports to incident patterns so low census couldn't be used as an excuse when acuity was high, implemented a no retaliation reporting pathway that didn't route through the same people who caused harm, created a standardized method for late charting that documented why it was late instead of fixing the time. And the most important thing? I started telling staff explicitly, if anyone asks you to change a chart to support billing rather than truth, come to me immediately. I said it in meetings, I said it in huddles, I said it so often people joked about it. But jokes are how nurses breathe. Underneath the jokes was something new. Permission to refuse. The question I can't stop asking myself, here's where I need Reddit, because my brain loops. I know logically that I did the right thing, but emotionally, there's a piece of me that still feels like a grenade went off in a unit full of people who are already exhausted. Some staff went through interviews that made them cry in bathrooms. Some got subpoena anxiety. Some had to admit they'd followed unethical instructions, even if they didn't fully understand the implications. And even though I fought to keep bedside nurses from being scapegoated, the process still hurt them. So I keep asking myself, if I just walked away quietly, would fewer people have been hurt? Then I remember the patients and the fraud and the manufactured understaffing, and I think, if I'd walked away, more patients would have been hurt. But then my guilt whispers, yeah, but at least your coworkers wouldn't have been dragged into it. And my precision answers, they were already in it. They just didn't know it yet. Final update. For the people who want closure, my record is clear. No board action, no mark. Todd is gone, not reassigned, gone. The staffing agency contract is terminated. The hospital implemented tighter controls on documentation edits. Staffing improved somewhat, though healthcare is still healthcare. Marisol is thriving and still terrifying in the best way. Lila transferred, kept her license, and sleeps better. I learned I'm not as fragile as fear told me I was. And yes, I still have the notebook. Not because I want revenge, because I want a world where stop being dramatic doesn't silence I'm being precise. So, AITA for refusing to play ball, for escalating, for lawyering up, and for pushing until the fraud and the intentional understaffing were exposed, even though it caused collateral stress for staff who were already drowning. Here are some top AITA thread comments, not the a-hole. You didn't cause collateral stress, The admin did. You just ripped the curtain down so everyone could see the machine chewing patients up. Not the a-hole, and as a nurse, thank you. People underestimate how terrifying just fix the timestamp is. That's your license. That's your entire life. You refusing saved other nurses from being forced into fraud. Not the a-hole. Stop being dramatic. I'm being precise. That's literally the difference between safety culture and negligence culture. Precision is not drama. Not the a-hole, but also HR doing HR things. The moment HR wouldn't name specifics, you are never going to get fairness. HR exists to protect the hospital, not you. You played it smart by getting a lawyer. Not the a-hole. They didn't investigate. They manufactured a narrative to intimidate you into compliance. The fact they sued you was a gift. Discovery is where liars drown, not the a-hole. The anonymous complaint plus schedule edits is straight up retaliation. That's not workplace drama. That's strategic career destruction, not the a-hole. Also, can we talk about how they froze overtime on a high acuity unit? That's like cutting brakes to improve fuel efficiency, not the a-hole. You didn't blow it up. You refused to be the scapegoat for a system designed to fail. If anyone caused chaos, it was the guy siphoning money through a family staffing agency. That's cartoon villainy with a LinkedIn profile, not the a-hole. People saying just quit have never worked in healthcare. You don't just walk away when patients are on the line. And quitting doesn't stop the fraud. It just hands them the next scapegoat. Not the a-hole. Monstrous without being cartoonish is exactly it. The scariest villains aren't loud. They're polished. They use policy as a weapon and smiles as cover. Not the a-hole. This is why we need unions and staffing ratios written into law. Admin will always choose money unless something forces them not to. Not the a-hole. Inspectors don't care about vibes. They care about timestamps. The minute you said audit trail, I knew Todd was toast. Not the a-hole, and I'm proud of Lila. People underestimate the courage it takes to come forward after watching someone get destroyed. She was trying to survive. You're not wrong, but you did know staff would get dragged into it. Edit. Actually, never mind. The more I think about it, they were already being used. Changing to not the a-hole. Info. Did Todd face consequences beyond being fired? Reply from you/legal eagle lady. If there's fraud plus self-dealing contracts, that can become criminal. But it depends on the investigation and what gets referred. Still not the a-hole. Not the a-hole. You protected patients and your staff long-term. Anyone mad at you is mad because you proved the system was rotten, and they'd rather blame a person than face that. Not the a-hole. The collateral stress argument is victim blaming. You shouldn't have reported the abuse because reporting it made people uncomfortable. Nope, the abuse is the problem, not the a-hole. Keep that notebook forever. The paper trail is the only language these people understand. Not the a-hole. If someone ever tells you stop being dramatic when you're raising a safety concern, that's your cue to document immediately. Not the a-hole. The most chilling part is the staffing agency tie. That's not bad management. That's intentional harm for profit. Update. I got my name back, and the hospital tried to pretend it never happened. Hi Reddit, Amelia here. It's been a few weeks since my original post, and I promised an update once I could breathe without feeling like my chest was full of broken glass. I read your comments at 2 a.m. like they were oxygen. I didn't respond much because my attorney told me to stop feeding the internet, which is hilarious coming from someone who bills in 6-minute increments. But I saw the support. I saw the nurses in the comments saying, "This is how it happens." I saw the non-healthcare folks saying, "I had no idea." And I saw the admin apologists getting dragged into the sun. So here's what happened after the investigation cracked open. HR emailed me with the most aggressively cheerful subject line I've ever seen in my life. Next steps and opportunities. Opportunities. Like they were inviting me to a potluck. They wanted me to come back as nurse manager again, but with additional oversight. Translation, leash. And they wanted me to sign a mutual separation settlement agreement with confidentiality language so broad it basically said, "You will never speak of this again, even if someone asks why Todd disappeared." Diane saw that and said, "Absolutely not." I told them I'd consider returning only if 3 things happened. 1. Written statement clearing my record, not just in your file. 2. Internal communication correcting the narrative, not vague, not incomplete information, but clear. 3. Documented policy changes around late charting and audit trail reviews so staff wouldn't be pressured again. HR tried to negotiate it down like I was asking for extra vacation days. Dana literally said, "We can't control how people interpret things." I said, "You controlled how people interpreted things when you fired me." The room got very quiet. I know a lot of you were worried they'd still report me to the nursing board just because. They tried to float it. Diane shut it down with one letter that basically translated to, "If you report without basis, we will bury you under retaliation claims and ask why you're reporting the whistleblower instead of the fraud." After that, radio silence on the board. Funny how obligation becomes optional when the paper trail points back at them. They sent a message to management, not everyone, which is still cowardly, stating the allegations against me were unsubstantiated and that there was no evidence of intentional falsification on my part. Within 24 hours, I got texts from people who had avoided me. "Hey, hope you're okay. That whole thing was crazy. So glad it got cleared up. I always knew you wouldn't do that." I did not respond to most of them, because here's the thing. I don't need people to like me. I need them to stop participating in public scapegoating because it's convenient. Kayla, the new grad from the original story, texted me privately. "I'm sorry I didn't defend you. They told us not to talk. I knew you didn't do it. I was scared." That one, I answered, because fear is real. And she's still learning how to survive this profession without letting it hollow her out. I told her the truth. You protected patients. That matters. And next time someone tells you to stay quiet, document. Not reassigned. Not transitioning. Not pursuing other opportunities. Gone. The official line was something like, "No longer with the organization," which is corporate speak for, "We removed him like a tumor, and we're hoping nobody asks what stage it was." Heather also vanished. One day she was swaggering through the unit like Todd's deputy. The next she was on leave, and then she was resigned. No apology, no accountability speech, no public admission. Just gone. Which, to be honest, is exactly how they operate. They protect the institution by removing the person who became too visible, without ever admitting what the institution allowed. Once Todd started collapsing, the hospital attempted the fastest pivot I've ever seen. Oh, a few nurses made some poor documentation choices. A few nurses. Like nurses are out here randomly adjusting timestamps for fun. Like there wasn't documented pressure from management. Like Heather didn't directly message people, telling them to fix it. Diane threatened retaliation claims if they disciplined bedside staff without acknowledging the systemic coercion, so they backed off. But the fact they tried, it confirmed what so many of you said. Hospitals will sacrifice anyone to protect the brand. Yes, I went back. Not as manager of my old unit, as patient safety lead. I can already hear the comments. "Why would you go back? Burn it down." Trust me, I considered it. But here's why I did it. Because if I left, the nurses still inside that building would still be vulnerable to the next Todd, the next stop being dramatic guy, the next person who wants to squeeze blood from a stone and call it efficiency. I didn't go back because I trust them. I went back because I trust the staff, and because I wanted to put guardrails in place while the hospital was scared enough to agree. My first week, I didn't do grand speeches. I did boring, effective things. Created a clear late charting workflow that documents why it's late instead of fixing timestamps. Implemented regular audit log reviews for patterns, not random punishment, pattern analysis. Tied staffing variance reports to acuity, not just census. Created a reporting channel that bypasses the exact managers who might be the problem. Added education that literally says, chart for truth, not for billing. And I told staff repeatedly, if anyone asks you to alter documentation to support billing rather than patient care, come to me. I said it so often people started joking about it, which is fine. Nurses joke so we don't scream. One day I walked past his old office. The nameplate was gone. The door was open. The room looked hollow. No clicking shoes. No warm voice. No solutions focused. Just an empty chair and the faint smell of stale coffee. And I felt something I didn't expect. Not triumph. Relief. Because predators rely on the illusion that they belong there. When they're removed, you realize the space was never theirs. It was just stolen. So, am I okay? I'm not going to pretend I'm magically fine. I still flinch when I get an email from HR. I still wake up some nights thinking about that termination letter and the words patient harm. But I'm also different now. I used to believe being by the book made me safe. Now I know being by the book makes me dangerous to the wrong people. Because books leave trails. Trails become evidence, evidence becomes consequences. And the verdict? Reddit consensus was overwhelmingly NTA. And honestly, I agree. If the truth causes chaos, well, it's because chaos was already there. Someone just turned the lights on. If you're watching this on YouTube, hit like, subscribe, and drop "I'm being precise" in the comments so I know you want more workplace justice stories.